A millionaire arrives at a luxurious business gala accompanied by his stunning girlfriend, basking in the prestige and wealth he has earned. However, his night takes an unexpected turn when he encounters his ex-wife, now dressed in a janitor's uniform, quietly working in the hall. In shock, he can hardly believe his eyes as memories of the past and the harsh reality of the woman he once loved collide before him. What he does next is unimaginable. The Manhattan skyline sparkled like a crown of diamonds against the evening sky, its towering spires piercing through wispy clouds that had taken on the golden hue of sunset. Inside one of these architectural marvels, the 52nd floor of the Chrysler Building had been transformed into a shimmering wonderland for the annual financial sector gala of New York. Jonathan Blake adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of a floor-to-ceiling window, his steel-gray eyes scanning the growing crowd below. At 45, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, tall, broad-shouldered, with just enough silver threading through his dark hair to lend him an air of distinguished authority. The Forbes magazine tucked away in his penthouse office had recently valued his tech investment firm at just over $8 billion. Yet tonight, something felt off. "Darling, you're doing it again." Emily Carter's voice carried the slightest hint of amusement as she approached, her Valentino gown catching the light like liquid gold. She reached up to straighten his already perfect tie, a gesture more about marking territory than fixing anything. "That brooding expression doesn't suit you. Remember what the media coach said about approachability." Jonathan forced his features into a more sociable arrangement. Emily was right, of course. She was always right about these things. In the 3 years they'd been together, she had proven herself invaluable in navigating the intricate social waters of Manhattan's elite. She knew exactly which hands to shake, which egos to stroke, which rumors to plant or squash. "Better," she approved, handing him a flute of champagne. "Senator Harrison just arrived with his wife. Shall we?" The evening proceeded like a well-choreographed dance. Jonathan moved from group to group, discussing market trends, pending legislation, and the ever-shifting landscape of tech investments. He managed to secure a promising lead on a quantum computing startup and arranged 3 power lunches for the following week. Everything was going according to plan until he glimpsed something, or rather someone, that made his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. She was wearing a grey uniform instead of designer clothes, pushing a cleaning cart rather than carrying a crystal champagne flute. Her once vibrant red hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she looked thinner than he remembered, but it was unmistakably Rachel Miller, his ex-wife. Jonathan's hand tightened around his glass as memories flooded back. Their small apartment in Boston, where they'd started out, her laughter echoing through Sunday mornings, the devastating discovery of her betrayal. But it wasn't Rachel alone that caused his breath to catch. It was the small figure beside her, a boy of about 5 with unruly dark hair and familiar grey eyes, helping her collect empty glasses from abandoned tables. The child looked up, and Jonathan saw it. A distinctive, crescent-shaped birthmark on the side of his neck, identical to his own. The room seemed to spin as the implications crashed over him like a tidal wave. This couldn't be possible. They'd been divorced for 6 years. Unless... "Jonathan?" Emily's voice cut through his daze. "The CEO of Goldman Sachs is waiting to discuss that merger proposal." He blinked, forcing himself back to the present moment, but his eyes kept drifting to the boy who was now disappearing through a service door with Rachel. The child he never knew existed. The son who shared his mark. The remainder of the gala passed in a blur of forced smiles and automatic responses. Jonathan heard himself speaking about market projections and quarterly forecasts, but his mind kept returning to that distinctive birthmark. the same crescent moon that had marked 3 generations of Blake men now adorned the neck of a child he'd never known existed. "Your glass is empty," Emily observed, smoothly replacing it with a fresh one. Her perfectly manicured nails brushed against his hand, a gesture that would normally ground him. Tonight, it felt like sandpaper against his skin. "You seem distracted. Perhaps we should make our exit." Jonathan nodded, grateful for the suggestion even as he questioned her motives. Emily never suggested leaving important events early. She was the one who had orchestrated his entire social calendar, who insisted on their presence at every major function. Her sudden concern felt out of character. In the back of their town car, Manhattan's lights blurred past the tinted windows. Emily's phone illuminated her face as she typed rapidly, probably updating their social media presence with carefully curated photos from the evening. Jonathan stared at his own reflection in the window, his hand unconsciously reaching for the birthmark on his neck. "I saw Rachel tonight," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's fingers paused over her phone screen for just a fraction of a second, so brief he might have imagined it. "Oh." Her tone was perfectly calibrated to convey mild interest tinged with dismissal. "I wasn't aware she was still in New York. She was working there as part of the cleaning staff." He turned to study Emily's reaction. She had a child with her, a boy. "How unfortunate," Emily murmured, her attention seemingly fixed on her phone. "I suppose everyone has to make ends meet somehow, though it's rather tasteless to bring a child to work, especially at such an event." Jonathan felt a surge of irritation at her casual dismissal. "The boy had my birthmark, Emily, the exact same mark, in the exact same place." This time, Emily's pause was unmistakable. She locked her phone and placed it in her clutch with deliberate care. "Darling, you've had quite a bit of champagne tonight, and the lighting at these events can be quite deceptive. Perhaps you saw what you wanted to see." "What I wanted to see?" Jonathan's voice took on an edge. "Why would I want to see my ex-wife working as a cleaner with a child who's clearly mine?" Emily turned to face him fully, her expression a perfect blend of concern and rationality. "Jonathan, think about this logically. Rachel betrayed you. She tried to take everything you had built. If she'd been pregnant with your child, don't you think she would have used that during the divorce? It would have been her trump card." Her words made sense, as they always did. Emily had a way of making everything sound reasonable, of taking complex emotional situations and reducing them to clear, logical points. It was one of the things that had drawn him to her initially, her ability to simplify his world when it felt chaotic. But something felt different tonight. Perhaps it was the way her concerns seemed rehearsed, or how quickly she dismissed the possibility. Or maybe it was the memory of that little boy's eyes that mirrored his own with unsettling accuracy. The car pulled up to their Upper East Side residence, but Jonathan made no move to exit. "I need to know the truth," he said finally. "I'm going to find out what happened." Emily's hand found his in the darkness. Her grip was gentle but firm. "Of course you are, darling, but let's approach this sensibly. I'll have my private investigator look into it first thing tomorrow. We don't want to create any unnecessary scandal, do we?" Jonathan nodded slowly, but as they ascended to their penthouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial, something that had been right in front of him all along. Morning found Jonathan in his home office, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by stacks of old papers he hadn't looked at in years. The divorce files, which Emily had so efficiently helped him organize and store away, now spread across his mahogany desk like fallen autumn leaves. Something wasn't adding up. He remembered signing these documents in a haze of betrayal and anger, trusting his lawyers and Emily, then his recently hired PR consultant, to handle the details. Now, reading through them with clear eyes, he noticed peculiarities. Letters, that Rachel had supposedly sent, demanding more money, emails threatening to expose company secrets. Yet the Rachel he'd seen last night, quietly doing her job with dignity despite her circumstances, didn't match this image of a gold digger. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Blake," his assistant's voice carried through the speaker. "Ms. Carter asked me to remind you about the board meeting at 11. Jonathan glanced at his watch. 9:45 a.m. "Thank you, Sarah. Before that, I need you to do something for me. Find out where Rachel Miller is currently employed." There was a pause. "Sir, Ms. Carter mentioned you might ask about Ms. Miller. She said to remind you that she's already engaged her private investigator for this matter." Of course she had. Emily's efficiency was legendary, but suddenly it felt suffocating. "Do it anyway, Sarah. Directly. Don't involve Emily's people." "Yes, sir." Another pause. "And, sir, there's something else. When I started working here 3 years ago, I was given a list of names, people whose calls should never be put through to you. Ms. Miller's name was on that list." Jonathan's hand froze over the papers. "Who gave you this list?" "Ms. Carter, sir. She said it was company policy to protect you from people trying to exploit your position." The room suddenly felt too small. Jonathan loosened his tie further, walking to the window that overlooked Central Park. How many other policies had Emily implemented without his knowledge? How many barriers had she erected around him while he wasn't paying attention? His cell phone vibrated. Emily, suggesting lunch at their usual place. He typed a quick excuse about meetings, then called a number he hadn't used in years. "Martinez, it's Blake. Remember that favor you owe me? I need everything you can find on Rachel Miller's life for the past 6 years. And I mean everything. Employment records, residence history, medical records." He paused. "And I need you to find out if there's a birth certificate for a boy, roughly 5 years old, with the last name Miller." "That's not exactly legal, Blake," Martinez replied. "I know, but I think I've been living in someone else's version of the truth for too long." After hanging up, Jonathan stared at the photo on his desk, him and Emily at last year's charity gala, both smiling perfectly for the cameras. He remembered how she'd insisted on taking multiple shots until they got one that was just right. Everything in his life had become like that photo, carefully composed, meticulously controlled, perfect on the surface. Sarah's voice came through the intercom again. "Sir, I found something. According to public records, Rachel Miller works for Crystal Clean Services. They're contracted to several major venues in Manhattan, including the Chrysler Building. She's been with them for 2 years." A pause. "And sir, there's something else. In 2019, she filed for bankruptcy. The paperwork mentions medical bills from Mount Sinai Hospital, dated around the time of your divorce." Jonathan's throat tightened. Mount Sinai was one of the best maternity hospitals in New York. "Thank you, Sarah. Cancel my board meeting. Tell them I'm not feeling well." He reached for his coat, already knowing where he needed to go. The pristine walls of his office, with their carefully curated art and strategic awards displays, suddenly felt like a prison. He needed answers, and he wouldn't find them here, surrounded by the life Emily had helped him build. As he headed for the elevator, his phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. "Hope you're not working too hard, darling. Don't forget we have dinner with the Vanderbilts tonight. Wear the blue tie I got you." Jonathan turned off his phone. For the first time in years, he was going to make his own choices, starting with a visit to Crystal Clean Services. Crystal Clean Services occupied a modest office in Queens, worlds away from Jonathan's gleaming Manhattan tower. He sat in his Bentley across the street, watching uniformed workers file in and out during shift change. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the industrial landscape, so different from the manicured world he'd grown accustomed to. A flash of red hair caught his attention. Rachel emerged from the building, her uniform exchanged for jeans. and a simple blue sweater. She looked tired, but carried herself with quiet dignity. The years had changed her, but not in the way success had changed him. While he'd grown harder, more polished, she seemed to have grown deeper, more authentic. Before he could second-guess himself, Jonathan stepped out of his car. "Rachel!" She stopped mid-stride, her whole body tensing at the sound of his voice. When she turned, her expression was carefully neutral. "Jonathan, I wondered how long it would take. You knew I'd come. I saw your face last night. You saw Lucas." It wasn't a question. She clutched her bag closer, as if preparing for a storm. "I suppose we should talk." "There's a coffee shop around the corner," he suggested, gesturing to the small cafe he'd noticed earlier. Rachel shook her head. "Not here. Too many people know me. There's a park 2 blocks down." They walked in silence, maintaining a careful distance. Jonathan noticed how she kept her eyes forward, never looking at him directly. The park was small, more of a concrete square with a few benches and struggling trees, but it offered some privacy. "Lucas," Jonathan said, testing. "The name. He's mine, isn't he?" "Yes." No hesitation, no dramatics, just simple truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked slightly. 6 years, Rachel, 6 years of his life. Gone. She finally turned to face him fully, and he saw a flash of the fire that had first drawn him to her years ago. "I tried, Jonathan. God, I tried. I called your office countless times. I wrote letters. I even came to your building once when I was 7 months pregnant. Your security threw me out, said I was on some kind of watch list." Jonathan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "That's impossible. I never got any messages, any letters." "Really?" Rachel's laugh was bitter, but not unkind. "Did you ever wonder why? Or were you too busy believing I was just a gold digger who betrayed you? It was easier that way, wasn't it? To think I was just another person trying to take advantage of the great Jonathan Blake?" He wanted to defend himself, to explain how everything had looked from his perspective, the damning emails, the threats, the evidence of her infidelity. But looking at her now, he saw something he'd missed 6 years ago. Genuine hurt, not calculation. "The photos," he said slowly, "of you with James Carter, Emily's brother." Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. "The photos where I was supposedly having an affair with him, the ones that conveniently appeared right when I was trying to tell you something important? Did you ever actually look at the date stamps on those photos, Jonathan?" He hadn't. He'd been too angry, too hurt, too willing to believe the narrative that Emily had carefully constructed. Emily, who had appeared in his life just when he was most vulnerable, who had helped him handle the divorce with ruthless efficiency. "James Carter was in Europe that entire month," Rachel continued quietly. "Anyone could have checked that, but you didn't want to check, did you? You wanted to believe I was guilty." Jonathan sank onto a nearby bench, the weight of his mistakes. Ian pressing down on him. "Lucas, is he... He's healthy, smart, loves dinosaurs and space." Rachel's voice softened slightly. "He has your eyes. And not just the color. He has that same look you get when you're trying to figure something out. I want to meet him properly." "No!" Rachel's response was immediate and firm. "Not until you understand exactly what happened 6 years ago. Not until you're ready to face the truth about the people you surrounded yourself with. Because I won't let my son be hurt by your world of power games and manipulation." She turned to leave, then paused. "You know what's ironic? I never wanted your money, Jonathan. I just wanted to tell you that you were going to be a father. But someone made very sure that message never reached you." As Rachel walked away, Jonathan remained on the bench, watching the setting sun paint the concrete buildings in shades of gold. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Emily, wondering why he'd missed the board meeting. He let it ring. The penthouse felt different when Jonathan returned that evening, as if seeing Rachel had altered his perception of everything around him. Emily's touches were everywhere. The carefully curated art pieces, the strategic placement of their photos together, the color-coordinated decor that she'd insisted would present the right image for their lifestyle magazine's features. "There, you are?" Emily emerged from their home office, looking immaculate in a navy sheath dress. "I've been worried sick. Your phone was off. The board meeting was cancelled." She approached with open arms, but stopped short when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" "I met with Rachel today," Jonathan said quietly, watching her face. Emily's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible shift in her stance. "Oh, I thought we agreed to let my investigator handle this properly." "Did we? Or did you decide that for me, like you've been deciding everything else for the past 6 years?" She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Darling, you're not making sense. Perhaps you should rest before dinner." "The Vanderbilts—" "I'm not going to dinner." Jonathan moved past her to his office. "And I think it's time we had an honest conversation about James." Emily followed him, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. "James? My brother? What about him?" Jonathan was already at his computer, pulling up his calendar from 6 years ago. "Where was James in September 2019? How should I remember that far back? Because that's when you showed me pictures of him with Rachel, pictures that convinced me she was unfaithful." His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing old emails. "But according to these travel records, James was in Monaco that entire month, working on the European expansion of your family's company." Emily's composure slipped for just a moment. "Those photos were doctored," Jonathan finished. "Weren't they? Just like Rachel's supposed threatening emails, just like everything else you used to make me believe she had betrayed me." "You're being ridiculous," Emily said, but her voice had lost its usual confidence. "Everything I did was to protect you. Rachel was going to ruin you, take everything you'd built, by telling me she was pregnant with my child." Jonathan stood facing her directly. "Was that how she was going to ruin me, by making me a father?" Emily's expression hardened. "You weren't ready for that kind of responsibility. Your company was just taking off. You needed to focus. I saw what you could become, what we could build together." She moved closer, reaching for him. "Look at everything we've achieved. The influence we have, the power built on lies." Jonathan stepped back. "I want to see every email that came through this office in the months before my divorce. Every letter, every phone message. Those records are long gone." "No," came a voice from the doorway. Sarah, his assistant, stood there holding a thick manila envelope. "They're not. I keep copies of everything, Ms. Carter. Company policy." "Remember?" Emily's face went pale. "You can't trust her. I caught her trying to access confidential files last year. That's why I recommended increasing security protocols." "You mean that's why you tried to have me fired?" Sarah corrected. "After I questioned why certain messages for Mr. Blake were being redirected to your office." Jonathan took the envelope from Sarah. "Thank you. Please cancel all my appointments for the next few days." He turned to Emily. "I think you should stay at your apartment for a while. I need time to review everything." "You're making a mistake." Emily's voice had turned cold. "Think about what this could do to your reputation, to your business relationships. I've protected you from so much—" "No," Jonathan interrupted. "You've isolated me, controlled me, made me dependent on your version of the truth." He gestured to the door. "Please leave. And Emily, don't try to contact Rachel again. Not through your investigators, not through anyone. After she left, Jonathan spent hours going through the documents Sarah had preserved. There they were, dozens of messages from Rachel, growing increasingly desperate as the months passed. Medical records she'd tried to send him, letters explaining the pregnancy, begging him to just talk to her, all intercepted, all hidden, all used to craft a narrative that had cost him 6 years with his son. His phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. Found something interesting about Emily's past. She's done this before. Call me. Jonathan stared out at the Manhattan skyline, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. Somewhere out there, his son was probably getting ready for bed, perhaps asking for one more story about dinosaurs or space. 6 years of bedtime stories lost, but not anymore. He picked up his phone and dialed Martinez's number. It was time to learn exactly who Emily Carter really was. Martinez's office was deliberately underwhelming. A small space in a nondescript building that belied the power of the information he gathered. The private investigator laid out 3 files on his cluttered desk, each bearing a different name but containing eerily similar stories. Thomas Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Tech, Gregory Hansen, hedge fund manager, and Peter Morrison, real estate developer, Martinez said, tapping each file in turn. All successful men who hired Emily Carter as a PR consultant or relationship manager. All of them had relationships end badly, just as their careers were taking off. And in each case, Emily stepped in to help manage the situation. Jonathan opened the Reynolds file, his stomach churning as he read. The pattern was identical. Mysterious evidence of infidelity, intercepted communications, carefully orchestrated misunderstandings. She's been doing this for years. There's more. Martinez pulled out another document. Remember James Carter, her supposed brother. He doesn't exist. Emily Carter isn't even her real name. She was born Amanda Pierce in Cleveland. The Carter, family connection, the elite education background, all fabricated. Jonathan thought of all the society events where Emily had expertly worked the room, dropping perfectly crafted hints about her family's old money connections. How many other lies had he built his life around? The photos she used to frame, Rachel, Martinez continued, were actually taken 2 years before Rachel even met James. Emily, or Amanda, just doctored the timestamps. Classic gaslighting technique. She's very good at it. But why? Jonathan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Why go to such lengths? Power. Control. Martinez leaned back in his chair. Some people collect art. She collects influential men, shapes them into what she wants them to be. From what I can tell, she's been working her way up the social ladder, each relationship more prestigious than the last. You were her masterpiece, young, ambitious, with huge potential. The perfect canvas. Jonathan thought of Rachel's words in the park. Someone made very sure that message never reached you. The systematic destruction of their relationship hadn't been about love or jealousy. It had been about opportunity. There's something else you should see. Martinez handed him a final document, a psychiatric evaluation from 15 years ago. She was briefly institutionalized under her real name. The diagnosis suggests a pattern of manipulative behavior and an obsession with controlling powerful men. She checked herself out against medical advice and disappeared. That's when Emily Carter was born. Jonathan stood abruptly, pacing the small office. I need to make this right, not just for Rachel and Lucas, but for everyone she's hurt. Be careful, Martinez warned. People like her don't give up control easily. She'll have contingency plans. As if on cue, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emily's been in the office. She accessed your private server. Should I initiate emergency protocols? Another message followed immediately. She also made calls to several board members, something about concerns over your mental state and decision-making capacity. Jonathan felt a cold clarity settle over him. Emily wasn't just trying to maintain her influence. She was preparing to destroy him if she couldn't control him. She would use every secret, every vulnerability she'd gathered over the years to discredit him before he could expose her. "I need copies of everything," he told Martinez. "Every piece of evidence about her past, every document showing what she did to Rachel. And I need them now." "Going to expose her?" Jonathan shook his head. "No. That would just trigger a mutually assured destruction. She knows too much about my business dealings, and a public scandal would only hurt Lucas." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "I have a better idea. Emily's power comes from controlling information. Time to use that against her." He dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "David, it's Blake. Remember that conversation we had about starting a charitable foundation? I think it's time. But first, I need your help with something delicate. How quickly can you set up a meeting with your sister at the SEC?" Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Playing her game?" "No," Jonathan replied, a grim smile forming. "I'm changing the rules. Emily spent years building a perfect image. Let's see how she handles having to choose between maintaining that image and trying to destroy mine." Oh, as he left Martinez's office, Jonathan felt lighter despite the challenges ahead. For the first time in years, he was thinking clearly, acting on his own terms. He had a son to get to know, a relationship to rebuild with Rachel, and a life to reclaim from the elegant prison Emily had constructed around him. His phone buzzed again, another message from Emily, this one almost desperate. "Please, Jonathan, let's talk about this. Everything I did was for us." He deleted it without responding. There was no more us. There was only the truth, and it was time for everyone to face it. The American Museum of Natural History buzzed with the excited chatter of schoolchildren on field trips. Jonathan sat on a bench in the Hall of Sauritian Dinosaurs, his suit jacket feeling strangely out of place among the casual visitors. Rachel had agreed to meet him here, neutral territory she'd called it, and mentioned that Lucas loved dinosaurs. He checked his watch again, then glanced at the small gift-wrapped package beside him. The vintage astronomy book had caught his eye in a rare bookstore window. Rachel had mentioned Lucas's fascination with space, and Jonathan hoped it might serve as a bridge between them. "Remember what I said?" Rachel's voice made him look up. She stood there with Lucas partially hidden behind her legs. "No pressure, no grand gestures, just a normal afternoon." Jonathan nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. Lucas peered around his mother, grey eyes wide with curiosity. He wore a blue t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it, and his dark hair had the same unruly wave that Jonathan saw in his own childhood photos. "Lucas," Rachel said softly, "this is Mr. Blake. He's going to join us for a little while today, if that's okay with you." The boy studied Jonathan carefully. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Jonathan glanced at Rachel, who gave him an encouraging nod. "I'm still learning about them. Maybe you could teach me." Lucas's face lit up. "Do you know about the Therizinosaurus? It had the longest claws of any dinosaur ever. They were like this big." He spread his arms wide. For the next hour, Jonathan found himself being led through the museum by an enthusiastic 5-year-old expert. Lucas knew the names of every dinosaur they encountered, rattling off facts about their diets and habitats with the certainty only a child could possess. Rachel walked a few steps behind them, her expression a mix of protective concern and cautious hope. "And this one," Lucas pointed excitedly at a massive skeleton, "is my favorite. The Barosaurus. It's even bigger than the T-Rex." "It's incredible," Jonathan agreed, genuinely fascinated by his son's knowledge and enthusiasm. "You know so much about these creatures." "Mom gets me books from the library," Lucas explained, "and sometimes we watch documentaries when she's not too tired from work." Jonathan felt a familiar pang of guilt, thinking of Rachel working long hours while raising their son alone. He caught her eye over Lucas's head, but she shook her head slightly. Now wasn't the time for that conversation. As they reached the space hall, Jonathan remembered the package. "Lucas, I brought something for you. Only if you want it, of course." Rachel tensed slightly, but Lucas's eyes lit up at the sight of the wrapped gift. With his mother's nod of approval, he carefully opened it. The vintage book's cover showed detailed illustrations of constellations and planets. "Wow," Lucas breathed, running his fingers over the gold-embossed stars. "Mom, look, it's got real star maps." "What do we say?" Rachel prompted gently. "Thank you, Mr. Blake." Lucas was already flipping through the pages. "Can we look for these stars tonight, Mom?" "It might be a bit cloudy tonight, sweetheart, but maybe this weekend." Jonathan saw his opening. "You know, the Hayden Planetarium has a special show about constellations on Saturdays. If it's all right with your mom, maybe we could all go sometime." Lucas looked hopefully at Rachel, who hesitated before responding. "We'll see. Right now, though, we need to head home. It's almost dinner time." As Lucas reluctantly closed the book, Jonathan's phone vibrated, a message from Sarah. "Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Emily's been making calls all day. She's planning something." He quickly typed back, "Implement protocol. Azure, and contact David. Tell him to move up the SEC meeting." "Everything okay?" Rachel asked, noticing his expression. "Just work," he assured her, putting the phone away. This afternoon wasn't about Emily or her schemes. It was about the little boy carefully placing his new book in his backpack, all ready, chattering about which constellations he wanted to find first. "Thank you," he said quietly to Rachel as they walked toward the exit, "for giving me this chance." "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "This is just one afternoon. Trust takes time to rebuild." "I know." Jonathan watched as Lucas ran ahead to look at one final dinosaur display. "But time is something I'm finally willing to invest in what really matters." Outside the museum, as they prepared to part ways, Lucas surprised them both by giving Jonathan a quick hug. "Bye, Mr. Blake. Thanks for learning about dinosaurs with me." Jonathan stood frozen, overwhelmed by the simple gesture. By the time he recovered enough to respond, Lucas was already skipping down the museum steps with Rachel, his new book clutched tightly to his chest. His phone buzzed again, more urgent messages about Emily's movements, board members' concerns, potential PR crises. But for the first time in years, Jonathan felt anchored by something stronger than the pull of his corporate world. He had held his son, heard his laugh, seen his eyes light up with joy. No power play Emily could devise could match the importance of that moment. The Blake Technologies boardroom crackled with tension. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, outwardly calm despite the storm he knew was coming. Emily had chosen her battlefield well, the very room where he'd built his empire, surrounded by the people who'd witnessed his rise to power under her careful guidance. "I must say, Jonathan, we're all quite concerned," Gerald Matthews, his senior board member, began. "These recent behaviors, missing meetings, erratic decisions, emotional outbursts, and now this sudden interest in creating a charitable foundation," Patricia Chen added, glancing at her notes. "It seems rather impulsive." Jonathan caught Emily's subtle smile at the other end of the table. She sat there in a conservative grey suit, the picture of professional concern. He had to admire her preparation. She'd spent years cultivating relationships with every person in this room, positioning herself as the stable force behind his success. "I appreciate your concern," Jonathan replied smoothly, "but I assure you, my recent decisions have been anything but impulsive." He opened his laptop, connecting it to the room's display system. In fact, I'd like to share our new strategic initiative. Emily shifted slightly. This wasn't part of her script. As you know, Jonathan continued, corporate responsibility and family values have become increasingly important to our investors. Our new charitable foundation isn't just about philanthropy, it's about positioning Blake Technologies for the future. He clicked through a series of carefully prepared slides, watching Emily's face as she realized he wasn't the scattered, emotional man she'd portrayed to the board. This was the Jonathan Blake she'd helped create. Strategic, forward-thinking, always 3 moves ahead. The Blake Family Foundation will focus on supporting single parents in tech education and entrepreneurship. We've already secured partnerships with 5 major universities and 2 Fortune 500 companies. He paused, meeting each board member's eyes. And we've attracted significant positive attention from the SEC for our innovative approach to corporate social responsibility. Emily's pen stopped moving. The mention of the SEC wasn't accidental. Jonathan knew she'd understand the implicit message. Any attempt to discredit him now would attract unwanted regulatory attention to her own past activities. Furthermore, he continued, this initiative has already generated considerable positive press. Sarah, could you distribute the preliminary media coverage? His assistant handed out folders containing carefully curated articles, all published. Within the last 24 hours, all praising Blake Technologies' bold new direction. David's media connections had worked quickly. I must say, Patricia Chen looked impressed. This is quite comprehensive. Indeed, Gerald Matthews agreed, though I'm curious about the timing. The timing, Emily interrupted smoothly, does seem rather convenient, especially given recent events in Jonathan's personal life. The room grew quiet. This was her play, to make his interest in helping single parents seem like an emotional reaction to discovering Lucas. You're right, Emily, Jonathan said, surprising her. Personal experience has shown me a gap in our corporate responsibility, but good leaders turn personal insights into professional opportunities. Isn't that what you taught me? She couldn't argue against her own teachings, not without undermining the very image she'd spent years crafting. Now, Jonathan continued, I believe we have some quarterly projections to discuss, unless there are other concerns about my leadership capacity. The board members shuffled their papers, thoroughly convinced by his display of strategic thinking. Emily sat back, her carefully orchestrated intervention neutralized. As the meeting proceeded with routine business matters, Jonathan's phone lit up with a text from Rachel. Lucas loved the astronomy book. He's been reading it every night. He asked if we could go to the planetarium this weekend. Something warm bloomed in his chest, more real than any corporate victory. He typed back, "Would Saturday at 2 p.m. work?" Rachel's response came quickly. Yes, but Jonathan, he asked if he could call you Dad instead of Mr. Blake. I told him we'd need to discuss it first. Jonathan looked up, meeting Emily's cold stare across the table. She was already planning her next move. He could see it in her eyes. But for the first time, her schemes seemed small and hollow compared to the simple message on his phone. I have to earn that name, he wrote back to Rachel, one step at a time. The meeting continued, but Jonathan's mind was already on Saturday, on constellations and quiet conversations, on building something real in place of carefully constructed illusions. Emily might not be finished, but she no longer held the power to define his worth or shape his future. That power now lay in the small hands of a boy who loved dinosaurs and stars, who might someday call him Dad. The Hayden Planetarium's dome stretched above them like a protective bubble, stars wheeling across the artificial sky. Lucas sat between Jonathan and Rachel, his face tilted upward in wonder as the narrator described the ancient myths behind the constellations. His small hand had found its way into Jonathan's sometime during the show, an unconscious gesture of trust that made Jonathan's throat tight with emotion. "Look," Lucas whispered excitedly, "that's Orion just like in the book." Jonathan squeezed his son's hand gently, savoring the moment of connection. But his peace was shattered by the buzz of his phone, Sarah's special alert pattern. He carefully extracted his hand and checked the message. "Urgent. Emily accessed the private servers. She's downloaded everything." A second message followed. "She's contacted all major financial news outlets, requesting interviews about concerns over Blake Technologies' future." Jonathan felt Rachel tense beside him. She'd noticed his change in demeanor. He gave her a reassuring nod, not wanting to disturb Lucas's enjoyment of the show, but inside his mind was racing. Emily was making her final play, preparing to burn everything down rather than lose control. As the show ended and they stepped into the sunlit afternoon, Jonathan's phone rang. Martinez. "Not now," Jonathan started to say, watching Lucas excitedly point out constellations in his book to Rachel. "You need to hear this," Martinez cut in. "Remember how I said Emily, Amanda, had done this before? One of her previous targets just came forward. Thomas Reynolds, he's ready to talk." Jonathan moved a few steps away. "What changed?" His daughter found old letters in their attic. Letters from his ex-wife, just like Rachel's letters to you. He's been looking for evidence of manipulation for years, and now he has it. But here's the kicker. He's not the only one. After I put out some careful inquiries, 3 more men came forward, all with similar stories. Jonathan watched Lucas showing Rachel something in his book, their heads bent together in shared fascination. "How quickly can you get them all in? 1 room. They're already waiting at my office, but Jonathan, there's something else, something bigger." Martinez paused. Emily didn't just manipulate relationships. She used her position to access insider information from each company she worked with. Been trading on it for years through shell companies. The SEC is very interested. A piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Emily's obsession with control wasn't just about power. It was about maintaining access to corporate secrets she could exploit. Jonathan had wondered how she maintained her luxurious lifestyle on a PR consultant's salary. "Dad! I mean Mr. Blake!" Lucas called out, breaking into his thoughts. "Can we get ice cream? Mum said to ask you." The simple question, the quickly corrected Dad, grounded Jonathan in what really mattered. "Of course we can, buddy. Just give me 1 minute to finish this call." Back to Martinez. "Get me a meeting. Tonight. With everyone. Already arranged. 8 p.m. But what about Emily? When she realizes we know about the insider trading..." "She won't run," Jonathan said with certainty. "Running would ruin the image she spent years creating. She'll try to spin it first. Use the media contacts she's cultivating right now." "How can you be so sure?" Jonathan watched his son, seeing his own determination reflected in those gray eyes. "Because I learned from her. About image, control, perception. She taught me too well." He hung up and rejoined Rachel and Lucas. "So, ice cream?" "Everything okay?" Rachel asked quietly, as Lucas walked ahead, pointing out architectural details that reminded him of space stations. "It will be," Jonathan replied. "Emily's making her move tonight, but this time I'm ready." Rachel studied his face. "Be careful. Women like her, they don't lose gracefully." "I know, but this isn't about winning anymore." He gestured to Lucas, who was now explaining to a hot dog vendor why astronauts can't eat regular ice cream in space. "It's about making things right, for everyone she's hurt." His phone buzzed again, this time with an email from Emily. To the board, expressing her deep personal concerns about his fitness to lead. Attached were selected documents from his private server, carefully edited to paint a picture of instability and reckless behavior. But Jonathan smiled, because she'd just done exactly what he expected. The SEC would be very interested in how she'd obtained that corporate information, and her email would provide a perfect paper trail. "What's that smile about?" Rachel asked. "Just thinking about something Emily once told me. In chess, the player who thinks they're winning often misses the quiet move that changes everything." They caught up with Lucas at the ice cream shop, where he was seriously debating the merits of different flavors. Looking at him, Jonathan felt a surge of gratitude toward Emily. In trying to keep them apart, she had ultimately brought them together. Sometimes the most important moves in life weren't the loud, dramatic ones, but the quiet moments of connection, like sharing ice cream with your son on a sunny afternoon in New York. Martinez's office had been transformed into an impromptu conference room. 4 men sat around the table, each with their own stack of documents, each with the same haunted look in their eyes. Thomas Reynolds, once a tech pioneer; Gregory Hansen, whose hedge fund had revolutionized sustainable investing; Peter Morrison, whose real estate empire had crumbled mysteriously after his divorce. And now Jonathan Blake, the latest in Emily Carter's, or rather Amanda Pierce's, carefully curated collection. "She always started the same way," Thomas Reynolds was saying, his fingers tracing the edge of a faded letter. "Appeared just when we were most vulnerable. Professional, capable, understanding. She knew exactly what we needed to hear." "And exactly how to isolate us," Gregory added. "It was subtle at first. Little comments about who we could trust, suggestions about which relationships might hold us back." The door opened and Sarah entered with a USB drive. The forensic team finished their analysis of Emily's laptop. "You were right, Mr. Blake. She's been accessing confidential information from every company she worked with. Trading patterns show she's made millions using insider knowledge." Jonathan nodded, unsurprised. "Send copies to the SEC team. They should be here soon." As if on cue, his phone buzzed. Emily requesting an urgent meeting at their usual restaurant. He showed the message to the group. "She doesn't know we're all here," Peter Morrison observed. "She thinks she's still controlling the narrative, which is exactly why this will work," Jonathan replied, standing. "Gentlemen, shall we?" The restaurant was one of Manhattan's finest, a place where Emily had orchestrated countless business, deals, and social connections. She sat at their regular table, wearing a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw Jonathan wasn't alone. "I don't believe I requested a group meeting," she said smoothly, but Jonathan caught the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her water glass. "Hello, Amanda," Thomas Reynolds said quietly. Emily's composure cracked for just a moment. "I'm sorry, you must be confused." "No confusion," Gregory Hansen interrupted, placing a folder on the table. "We have the records from Cleveland Medical Center, your psychiatric evaluation, your real identity. And these," Peter Morrison added another folder, "are the trading records from your shell companies. Fascinating pattern of purchases just before major corporate announcements." Emily's eyes darted between them, her mind visibly racing to find an angle, a way to spin this. "Jonathan," she tried, her voice softening to the tone that had so often swayed him before, "surely you can see what they're trying to do. They're jealous of what we've built together." "What you built," Jonathan corrected, "was a house of cards, using our secrets, our vulnerabilities, our trust, trading on insider information you gathered by manipulating your way into our lives. Everything I did was to protect you," she insisted, "to help you reach your potential. Look at what you've become." "No," Jonathan leaned forward. "Look at what I lost. 6 years with my son. A relationship built on love and trust, not manipulation. The chance to become someone real, not just your carefully crafted creation. Your son, Emily laughed, but there was an edge of desperation now. That child is the reason I had to step in. You were going to throw everything away for some domestic fantasy. I saved you from mediocrity. Actually, a new voice joined. You committed securities fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. Emily turned to find David's sister, Gloria Chen, from the SEC, standing beside their table with two federal agents. Ms. Pierce, Gloria continued, we have some questions about your trading activities over the past decade, and about certain corporate documents that were illegally accessed and distributed. Emily's face went blank, her mask finally cracking completely. She looked at Jonathan one last time, and he saw something he'd never seen before in her eyes. Fear. You wouldn't, she whispered. Think of the scandal. Think of what this will do to Blake Technologies' stock price. Jonathan stood, straightening his jacket. You taught me well, Emily. About image, about control, about always being 3 moves ahead. But you forgot something important. What's that? She asked, even as the agents moved closer. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply telling the truth. As the agents led Emily away, Jonathan received a text from Rachel. Lucas wanted to show you his science project tomorrow. He made a model of the solar system. Looking at the message, Jonathan felt the last weights of Emily's influence fall away. She had tried to make him choose between success and genuine human connection. But sitting there with the other men, she'd manipulated watching her perfectly constructed world crumble. He realized there had never really been a choice at all. Real power wasn't about control or manipulation. It was about having the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to try again. It was about building something genuine, even if it meant starting over. Gentlemen, he said to the others, I believe we all have some rebuilding to do. They nodded, understanding in their eyes. Emily had taken years from all of them, but she hadn't taken their future. That still belonged to them, and to the relationships they could now rebuild. Without her shadow hanging over them, Lucas's solar system hung from the ceiling of his bedroom, planets carefully painted and suspended at different heights. Jonathan stood in the doorway, watching his son make final adjustments to Jupiter's position, his tongue stuck out in concentration. As he worked, "See, Dad, I made sure to get the distances right using the scale in my book." Lucas beamed with pride, the word "Dad" now flowing naturally from his lips after 3 months of building trust and spending time together. "It's incredible, buddy," Jonathan replied, meaning it. The model showed meticulous attention to detail, a trait Lucas had inherited from both his parents. "Although, I think Saturn's rings might need a slight adjustment." Rachel appeared behind them, leaning against the doorframe. "He spent 3 days getting those rings exactly right. Someone's perfectionist genes are showing." The gentle teasing in her voice was new, a sign of the careful friendship they'd been rebuilding. After Emily's arrest and the media storm that followed, Rachel had been his unexpected anchor, helping him navigate the challenges of genuine relationships and fatherhood. "Mom, can Dad stay for dinner?" Lucas asked, climbing down from his step stool. "We're having spaghetti and meatballs." Rachel and Jonathan exchanged a look. These impromptu family dinners had become more frequent lately, but they were still finding their rhythm, careful not to rush into anything that might confuse or hurt Lucas. "If he's not too busy," Rachel replied diplomatically. "Actually," Jonathan said, "I wanted to talk to you both about something." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "The Blake Family Foundation is finally ready to launch, and I could use your input." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Our input?" "Well, Who better to advise a foundation focused on supporting single parents than someone who's lived that experience? He spread the documents on Lucas's desk, careful not to disturb the carefully arranged space books. And Lucas, I thought you might have some ideas about the science education programs we're planning. Lucas's eyes widened. Really? Can we include dinosaurs and space? Jonathan smiled. Absolutely. In fact, I was thinking we could partner with the Natural History Museum and the Planetarium for special programs. As Lucas excitedly began listing all the topics they should cover, Jonathan caught Rachel watching them with an unreadable expression. What? He asked quietly when Lucas darted to his bookshelf to find reference materials. You're different, she said. The old Jonathan Blake would have hired consultants and PR firms to design this foundation, but here you are, asking advice from a 5-year-old. The old Jonathan Blake was someone Emily created, he replied. I'm still figuring out who I am without her influence, but I know I want it to be real this time. No more perfectly crafted images or strategic relationships. Rachel's expression softened. And that's why we're having these family dinners? Part of finding the real Jonathan Blake? Part of finding my real family, he corrected. If that's something you'd both want, eventually. Before Rachel could respond, Lucas returned with an armful of books. Dad, we should have a program about exoplanets and one about black holes. And maybe we could help other kids who like science, but don't have all the books they need. Jonathan pulled out a chair, patting the seat beside him. Tell me more about your ideas, buddy. I want to hear everything. As Lucas launched into an enthusiastic explanation, Jonathan felt Rachel's hand briefly touch his shoulder, a gesture of support, of possibility. The touch was light, but it carried the weight of shared history and potential future. The scene was nothing like the power dinners Emily used to orchestrate in expensive restaurants. Instead of fine china and strategic conversation, there were dinosaur placemats and enthusiastic discussions about space. Instead of networking and manipulation, there was genuine connection and joy. His phone buzzed. Probably another media request for comment about Emily's upcoming trial. But for the first time in his adult life, Jonathan didn't feel compelled to immediately check it. The real work, the important work, was right here in this room with his son's solar system spinning gently above them. So, Rachel said, a small smile playing at her lips, spaghetti and meatballs. Fair warning, Lucas insists on helping cook these days. Wouldn't miss it for the world, Jonathan replied, watching as Lucas began sketching out his vision for the Foundation's science programs, complete with stick-figure dinosaurs in spacesuits. Sometimes he realized the greatest success stories weren't about corporate takeovers or stock prices. Sometimes they were about simple moments like this, helping your son reach for the stars while building something real and lasting in the process. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras flashing like stars in a hostile galaxy. Jonathan adjusted his tie, not one of the ones Emily had chosen for him, but a simple blue one Lucas had picked out during their first shopping trip together. Because it matches your eyes, Dad. Mr. Blake, any comment on Emily Carter's trial? How do you respond to allegations that the Foundation is just a PR move? Is it true you're reconciling with your ex-wife? The questions peppered him like rainfall, but Jonathan moved through them with a calm he'd never possessed during Emily's carefully orchestrated media appearances. This wasn't about image anymore. It was about ending a chapter properly. Inside the courtroom, he found Rachel already seated in the gallery. They'd discussed this moment last night over coffee after putting Lucas to bed. You don't have to testify, she'd said. The SEC has enough evidence without your statement. But he'd shaken his head. I need to face her, not for revenge, but for closure, for all of us. Now, as Emily was led into the courtroom, Jonathan studied her carefully. She wore a conservative grey suit, playing the role of the misunderstood professional woman, no doubt. But there were cracks in her armor. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes, and her usually perfect posture showed signs of strain. She caught his eye and gave him a small, knowing smile. Even now, she was trying to maintain the illusion of control. When Jonathan took the stand, Emily's lawyer approached with practiced concern. "Mr. Blake, isn't it true that Miss Carter's guidance was instrumental in your success?" "She was very good at what she did," Jonathan agreed. "She taught me about perception, about control, about maintaining the right image. But she also taught me the price of living a lie." "A lie?" The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't she simply protecting your interests?" Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "2 months ago, my son asked me what I was like at his age. It should have been a simple question. But I realized I'd spent so many years being Emily's creation that I'd forgotten who I really was. That's what she took from all of us, not just money or opportunities, but our authentic selves." He turned to look directly at Emily. "She convinced us that image was everything, that vulnerability was weakness, that real connections would hold us back, and we believed her because she made success feel like love." Emily's facade cracked slightly, a flicker of something. Recognition? Regret? Crossing her face. "But success without authenticity is just another prison," Jonathan continued. "She didn't protect us, she isolated us, made us dependent on her version of reality. Used our secrets to trade stocks illegally, yes, but more than that. She traded in human trust and vulnerability." The prosecutor rose. "Mr. Blake, when did you first suspect Ms. Carter's manipulation?" Jonathan thought of that night at the Gala, of Lucas's birthmark, of Rachel's quiet dignity. The truth has a way of finding light. Sometimes it takes a child to make you see what's been in front of you all along. After his testimony, during a break in proceedings, Emily requested to speak with him privately. Under the watchful eye of her guard, she met him in a conference room. "You've changed," she said, studying him. "This new version of you, it's so ordinary." Jonathan smiled. "That's because it's real. No perfect image, no strategic moves. Just me, trying to be a good father and a better man." "And that's enough?" There was genuine curiosity in her voice and perhaps a trace of longing. "More than enough. Lucas showed me his science project yesterday. It wasn't perfect. Some of the planets were a little lopsided, and Saturn's rings were made of painted pasta. But watching him explain it, seeing his genuine enthusiasm, that meant more than any corporate victory ever did." Emily's mask slipped entirely for a moment. "I really did think I was helping you all, protecting you from messiness, weakness." "The messiness is where the real living happens," Jonathan replied softly. "I hope you find that out someday." Amanda. Her real name hung between them like a bridge to a truth she wasn't ready to cross. She straightened, her armor sliding back into place. "They're offering a deal. 10 years, with the possibility of parole." "I hope you use that time to find yourself, the real you, not the perfect image you created." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "The foundation. It's good work. Real work." Jonathan nodded. "Lucas wants to add a program helping kids learn about astronomy. He says everyone should have a chance to reach for the stars." "He sounds like you, the real you from before." "No," Jonathan smiled. "He sounds like himself, and that's exactly as it should be." Walking back to the courtroom, Jonathan's phone lit up with a text from Rachel. Lucas insisted on waiting up to hear how it went, currently explaining to his stuffed dinosaur why the justice system is important. Looking at the message, Jonathan felt the last weights of Emily's influence fall away. She had taught him about power, but his son was teaching him about joy. She had shown him how to control, but Rachel was showing him how to trust. The reporters were still waiting outside, hungry for drama and scandal, but Jonathan Blake, the real Jonathan Blake, had a bedtime story about dinosaurs and justice to tell his son. The Boston Public Garden was exactly as Jonathan remembered it, though the trees seemed older, wiser somehow. He and Rachel sat on a bench near the lake where they'd first met 12 years ago, watching Lucas feed the ducks with the careful concentration he brought to all his tasks. "One at a time," Lucas called out to the ducks, breaking each piece of bread into precise portions. "Everyone gets their fair share. That's what Dad says about the foundation money." Rachel laughed softly. "He's definitely your son. I've never seen a 5-year-old so concerned with equitable distribution." "He gets his sense of justice from you," Jonathan replied, watching as Lucas made sure even the smallest duck got its share, along with his strength and resilience. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the autumn breeze carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibilities. It was their first time back in Boston together since the divorce, a trip Jonathan had suggested after Lucas expressed curiosity about where his parents had met. "I remember that day," Rachel said suddenly, nodding toward a spot near the water. "You were sitting right there, nose buried in a book about quantum computing. I thought you were pretending to be intellectual, to impress girls." "I was," Jonathan admitted with a grin, "though I actually did read the book later, wanted to be able to talk to you about it when I saw you again. And now our son reads quantum physics books for fun." Rachel shook her head in amazement. "Well, picture books about quantum physics anyway." Jonathan watched Lucas, who had moved on to explaining to a patient swan why water molecules stick together. "I've been thinking about that apartment we had near Harvard Square, the tiny one with the crooked floors and the window that wouldn't quite close. Where we had to stuff towels under it during winter storms," Rachel remembered, "and the radiator that sounded like an angry dragon. I drove past it yesterday," Jonathan said carefully. "They're selling it. The whole building's been renovated, but it's still our beginning," Rachel finished. She studied his face. "Why are you telling me this?" Jonathan turned to face her fully. "I want to buy it, not to live in. It's too small for that now, but as a reminder of who I was before Emily, before success changed me, of who we were together." "Jonathan, not to pressure you," he added quickly. "I know we're still finding our way, still learning to trust again, but that apartment, it represents something real, something true." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, watching Lucas, who had now taken out his notebook to sketch the swan. "The Jonathan I knew there in that apartment, he was different from the man you became, but he's also different from who you are now. Is that a bad thing?" She shook her head. "No, that Jonathan was young, ambitious, full of dreams but untested. The man you became under Emily's influence was successful but hollow. But now," she gestured to where Lucas was calling them over to see his drawing, "now you're something else entirely, something real and earned." They walked over to their son, who proudly showed them his surprisingly detailed sketch of the swan. "Look, I remembered what you said about observing details, Dad. And Mom, I used the shading technique you taught me." Jonathan felt Rachel's hand brush against his as they both leaned down to admire the drawing. The touch seemed to carry echoes of their past and whispers of their future. "The apartment," Rachel said later as they walked through the public garden, Lucas running ahead to collect particularly interesting leaves. "If you buy it, what would you do with it?" "Turn it into a satellite office for the foundation," Jonathan replied. "A place where single parents can come for help with education, job training, childcare. Remember how hard it was for us starting out here?" Rachel nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "And that window that never quite closed. First thing to fix, along with that angry dragon radiator." He paused, watching Lucas excitedly point out a squirrel to a passing tourist. But I'd keep some things. The marks on the doorframe where we measured our height, the dent in the wall from when we tried to dance in that tiny living room. The chalk outline of the quantum entanglement diagram you drew to propose to me. Rachel added softly. Jonathan looked at her in surprise. You remember that? Of course I do. You said that like those particles we'd always be connected, no matter how far apart we were. She smiled. Pretty nerdy as proposals go. Still true, though, he said quietly. Even when everything fell apart, even when I let Emily remake me into someone else, some part of us stayed connected. Just took a little boy with a birthmark to remind me. Lucas ran back to them, arms full of leaves in various shades of red and gold. Mom, Dad, look what I found. Can we do a science experiment about why leaves change color? Of course, buddy, Jonathan replied. But first, what do you think about having a special place in Boston? Somewhere that helps other families, but also has some of Mom and Dad's history? Lucas considered this seriously. Can we put up my solar system there, and maybe some dinosaur pictures, to make other kids feel happy when they visit? Rachel's eyes met Jonathan's over their son's head. In them, he saw not the pain of the past or the uncertainty of the future, but the simple truth of the present moment. Yes, she said, and Jonathan knew she was answering more than just Lucas's question. I think that would be perfect. The renovated apartment near Harvard Square hummed with activity. Where once a broken radiator had grumbled, now children's laughter echoed through. Bright, welcoming rooms. The window that had never quite closed had been replaced with a bay window seat where parents could sit and watch their children play in the small but vibrant learning space the foundation had created. Jonathan stood in what had once been his and Rachel's tiny living room, now transformed into a mini science center. Lucas's solar system hung from the ceiling, and carefully framed dinosaur drawings adorned the walls. But there, in one corner preserved under glass, was the faded chalk outline of a quantum entanglement diagram. Mrs. Martinez's daughter got accepted to MIT, Rachel said, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. Full scholarship. Apparently, the Foundation's tutoring program made all the difference. Jonathan accepted the coffee gratefully. Lucas will be thrilled. He's been helping her with physics. Our 6-year-old helping a high school senior with physics. Rachel shook her head, smiling. Sometimes I wonder if he's too much like you. God, I hope not, Jonathan replied, but his tone was light. The old me, maybe. But he's got something I never had until recently. He knows who he is. Through the doorway they could see Lucas, in the reading nook, surrounded by a group of younger children. He was holding up his beloved astronomy book, explaining constellations with the same patience and enthusiasm he'd shown that first day at the museum. The Foundation board called yesterday, Jonathan said after a moment. They want to expand the program nationwide, open centers like this in other cities. Rachel studied him. And what did you tell them? That I needed to discuss it with my family first. He turned to face her fully. This isn't like before, Rachel. No unilateral decisions, no putting business before what matters most. She reached out and straightened his tie, not one of Emily's chosen power statements, but a whimsical one covered in tiny dinosaurs, a birthday gift from Lucas. The gesture echoed their past, but felt different now. Genuine, caring, rather than controlling. You know, she said, I got an interesting call from the Natural History Museum last week. They're looking for someone to coordinate their educational outreach programs. Apparently, our little science center caught their attention. Jonathan's eyes lit up. Rachel, that's perfect. You've always wanted to work in education, and with your experience here, it would mean staying in New York, she interrupted softly. Permanently. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. They'd been dancing around this conversation for months, taking careful steps forward while always leaving space for retreat. We could look for a place near the park, Jonathan suggested carefully. Something with room for a proper science lab for Lucas, maybe a garden where we could stargaze. And what about Emily's old penthouse? Sold it last week. The money's going to fund scholarships for single parents returning to school. He paused. I don't want to live in the life she created anymore. I want to build something new with you and Lucas, if that's what you want too. Before Rachel could respond, Lucas came running over. Dad! Sophie doesn't believe that you drew a quantum diagram to propose to Mom. Can you show her, please? Jonathan laughed. Well, we can't have anyone doubting our quantum love story, can we? He turned to the group of children now gathering around them. Who wants to learn about quantum entanglement? As Jonathan began, drawing on the whiteboard, explaining complex physics concepts in terms children could understand, Rachel watched him with their son. This wasn't the ambitious young man from their first apartment, nor the polished corporate titan Emily had created. This was someone better, someone real, who had learned that true success wasn't measured in stock prices or social status, but in moments of genuine connection. Later that evening, as they walked through Harvard Square, Lucas ran ahead to press his nose against the window of his favorite bookstore. Rachel slipped her hand into Jonathan's. Yes, she said simply. Yes. Yes to New York. Yes to finding a place near the park. Yes to everything. Jonathan squeezed her hand, feeling the quantum connection that had never truly broken, even through years of separation and lies. We'll do it right this time. No shortcuts, no perfect images to maintain. Just us being real. Mom! Dad! Lucas called out. The bookstore has a new book about black holes. And look, they're having a stargazing event on the roof next week. They joined their son at the window, their reflection in the glass showing not a carefully crafted portrait of success, but something far more valuable. A family, imperfect but real, finding their way back to each other under the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting. You know, Rachel said, watching Lucas explain the concept of event horizons to a fascinated passerby, quantum entanglement doesn't just connect particles, it changes them. They can never go back to what they were before, but sometimes they become something better. Jonathan looked at his son, then at Rachel, and finally at his own reflection, no longer a stranger wearing a perfect mask, but simply a man who had found his way home. Better, he agreed, and real. Above them, the first stars of evening began to appear, constant and true, witnessing this new beginning just as they had witnessed the start of Jonathan and Rachel's story years ago. In the end, it hadn't been Emily's carefully orchestrated power plays that had given Jonathan what he truly wanted. It had been a little boy's birthmark, a woman's quiet strength and the courage to finally be authentic. Some might call it taking a step down from his former life of power and precision. But standing there with his family, watching his son's eyes shine with the same wonder that had once led him to draw quantum diagrams for the love of his life, Jonathan Blake knew the truth. He hadn't stepped down. He had grown up. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.